So welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast. I'm Brad Levitt, and we have Tony Frazier with us. Welcome, Tony.
Excited to be here, Brad. I'm a fan of you as a builder and also follow your podcast, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. Tony is owner and home designer of Frazier Home Design, and we've been a huge fan. I know my wife is a huge fan as well of everything you do because she's always like, "Hey,
Nice.
Brad, did you see this one that Tony just posted?" And I know we've been friends for quite a while through Instagram, and it's been pretty fun to see your journey. We'll have to dive into that because you've hit a lightning stride on there and done really well. So it's pretty
Thanks,
awesome
man.
to see.
Thank you.
It's not surprising though. I mean, you design great stuff. So maybe we
That's
dive.
the goal, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's amazing because you've brought in a national brand, which I think is super amazing. So maybe we start here. I see your designs all over social media, as we mentioned. You've continued to take hold of that platform, and so has this always been part of your job history doing these custom designs?
We actually, when I first started, I started the company. We're in Raleigh, by the way, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I started the company in 2007 out of my house. And sort of nature of the beast of being here in Raleigh, everything was sort of like production driven. There's some custom homes, but certainly not the definition of custom that we have today. But we started off just doing sort of like semi-custom, a little bit of production. Again, I was out of my house by myself. So it was really just me kind of getting into the beginning of this recession without knowing it. And once the recession hit, I was super fortunate that I teamed up with a few production builders that were really just like getting started. Land prices were cheap and these guys had a lot of money. And for whatever reason, I was in the right place, right time. I got calls from like 3 different local production builders. They weren't national, but they're all over, North Carolina and certainly the Triangle area. And I got in with those guys, and it wasn't like the most creative work, but it was feeding my family, which I was very fortunate again to have. But the type of work that they did is they'd have they'd have a large neighborhood with 150 lots, and they'd say create 5 plans with 3 different exteriors, and it allowed me then to even just right out of the recession in 2009 to start hiring people, and so it was probably 2012 when the custom plans started to kind of come back in. And again, it was really, at that time, what I would call semi-custom, but we weren't necessarily paying attention to how each house sat on the lot. We weren't paying attention to the sun or the topography, or really a builder would come in and say, hey, we have this footprint and we need this square footage. And then we would kind of plug that in. At that time, a lot of our work, or most of our work, was generated directly from builders. So we were the partner of the builder, essentially a subcontractor of the builder. This is before our name was out there, certainly nationally, but also locally. We would get calls from time to time from local homeowners that would come to us, but again, 95% of our work was from builders. And as it kind of progressed and the economy got better, more and more custom would come in. And it wasn't until, I would say, 2013 that we really started to get, again, our name out there a little bit more. We started to get a hold of what we wanted to do, and our company was running better. We were developing systems and processes, and things were kind of clicking on all gears, and we started to jump into custom and push the envelope a little bit more. And it was really like locally, I started seeing a few contractors, or one in particular, Dixon Kirby, kind of push the envelope. And I remember seeing that. I remember driving through a neighborhood that had sort of this old world European style of architecture that wasn't done necessarily correctly. Like they put a 12-inch overhang on a Tudor style house just because that's what they knew it to do. And I saw this Dixon Kirby house, and it sort of just blew me away. Proportion, scale, detail galore, like everything was on point. And it made me see that we could do that locally in this production environment. We could do that here. And I was so excited about it, and I started to push the designs a little bit more. And at that time, we probably had 100 builders that we were working with here locally. And so when we jumped into it initially, every builder was scared. Like, this is completely different than anything that we wanted to do. And we kept pushing, and then ultimately started drawing a lot more details and sections on our plans that then weren't followed. And so it was us kind of going out in the field and teaching the subcontractors, but also learning from the subcontractors, and our details and processes started to get better. And then we, hit the ground running and started to pave the way for where we are today.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, what's unique about your market, I'm part of CBUSA, which is a contractor. It's a group purchase essentially for custom builders. And in Arizona, our market's so unique because it's dominated outside the custom world. It's dominated by the national builders, right? Whereas in the South, especially North Carolina, I know CBUSA has an amazing presence, because there's a lot of these smaller, I shouldn't say smaller, but I mean, they're doing 100 homes, 400 homes, 600 homes, that semi-production,
nice.
Product out there in the Carolinas and in the South. And you don't see a lot of builders here in Arizona that are doing 400 homes because they get bought up by the big national builder because they own the land. And so from your side, as you are building your name, and this is interesting because before we dive into the custom side, how did you begin these relationships? I mean, 2007, everything looked great then. I mean, it was right on the precipice of it all falling apart for all of us. But how did you begin those relationships just to say, okay, you know what, I'm Tony, I'm ready to go out on my own, I'm ready for this, and how do I start pounding the pavement to start meeting these production builders?
So I was in a very fortunate position where the previous company that I was with, which was a structural engineering firm, by the way, and I ran the design division. I sort of created it from scratch. So I was the point of contact. I was the name of the design.
Real quick, this was a structural engineering company, but then they also worked with design, and then you're facilitating that and bringing that to life?
That's exactly right. So initially, I worked for an architectural firm, and everything that we did, we sent off to a structural engineering firm or multiple structural engineering firms. And, of course, we formed relationships there. So a structural engineering firm called me one day and said, hey, we were thinking of forming a design division. We don't draw homes, and people ask us all the time, would you like to join our team? And I was 23 or 4 at the time. And I was like, man, that sounds amazing. So I took that opportunity, and really for the first 6 months, they weren't using CAD or anything at the time. They were hand drawing, and then they would send it back to the home designers or architects, and they would plug it in CAD. So I came in and developed their CAD system, and really, for the first 6 months, I was really just plugging in beams and joist spans and valleys and getting sort of a CAD system developed. But I was learning so much from those guys.
That had to have been huge, though. If I interrupt you, Tony, I mean, if you're working from the structural side, because I've worked with a lot of different draftsmen or designers, from the architecture side, and some don't have that element, right? They send it out to the consultants and third parties. But I mean, that has to give you a huge advantage, especially to understand the structural component of it.
Absolutely. It's absolutely imperative to have that knowledge. I mean, it's beyond just kind of stacking walls and everything. It's getting massing on roofs correctly and understanding just how all the loads are transferred down. But again, I did that piece for, a couple years, but certainly the 6 months, I didn't draw any houses. It was really just plugging in data and learning from those guys. And again, so I started that design division, hired a couple guys. We started to get builders that would come in and want us to design houses, but they were semi-custom. Again, they weren't super, super high end. I mean, some of them were in the $1 million range, but it wasn't what we do now at all. So it was really cool to kind of take it to that point. And again, the clients knew me. They didn't really know the structural aspect. We just happened, the ones that sort of were going through me were just happy that I had contacts with a structural engineer under one roof, but it was really about me. So I sort of, came to the epiphany one day that I kind of wanted to do it on my own and create my own thing, and felt like I had a decent client base. So I didn't really tell any clients that I was leaving. I felt kind of awkward about that. But day one, I essentially went to the Home Builders Association website, wrote down every builder's name, and my wife helped me with this. And basically we sent out a mailer to everybody with a few photos of houses. And this was 2007. Day one, I got 10 or 12 calls. And at the time, though, I was a cheap, fast guy. So I was plugging in my turnaround times and my really low footage rates. Right. And we got calls right away. And I'm in a room out of my house, 2007, just thinking that the world was my oyster. I'm so excited. Everything's pouring in. And then one day, Brad, as you know, it was like a faucet, just turned off. Yeah. It was amazing. And a few of my custom guys would call me and be like, the bank will not let us build another spec. And if a pre-sale comes along, they have to have really good credit. So it literally turned off, and it got to a point. Initially, it was man, it's kind of cool. I'm playing golf in the middle of the day, and my wife and I are going to the movies in the middle of the day. And then that kind of turned into a little bit of fear, what else can I do? The building industry isn't hiring at all. what else could I do? And I didn't know the answer to that, and it started to get really scary. And then one day, a guy called me for a renovation for a small ranch house that was in the woods, essentially. And I went there and met him, and sort of came to the realization through the conversation when I was there that he was a production builder just getting started and wanted to renovate that one house, but develop a bunch of homes all the way around that particular home. And that's how I got my start. And my name was out there with him. I got another one and another one, and then was able to kind of catapult and hire people. And it was sort of a weird time, as you know, but like a lot of the architectural firms or home design companies that were here in Raleigh were hurting. They had, 15, 50 employees. They were kind of hurting and coming down or changing the trajectory of what they were doing and spreading out a little bit. And so I was like the new kind of young guy, and I was working nights and weekends and, every available hour that I could find, and just pushed and pushed and pushed until, kept my head down and worked and worked and worked. And then one day looked up and was like, oh shit, man, I got a lot of stuff going on. This is awesome. I should hire some people. And then it never looked back from there.
So how, that's interesting because, as you mentioned, you built an incredible firm, which we'll get to, but when you start thinking about, part of this is we start a company, right? And this is something I speak about a lot on the podcast is it's really hard to understand your worth, right? I'm sure for you, Tony, that you have this experience, you work on the structural engineering side, you have this great knowledge, great creativity from the design side, but there's still a balance. And of course, for you starting your company when you did, you had the recession, which is now going to lower the fee essentially until you can start building it up, and business is there. So there's a little bit of that, but part of it is, when did you kind of hit that threshold when you said, okay, I know my worth, I can raise my rates, and I know what I'm worth because I understand the business? That takes some time and growth for any company when they're first starting out.
And we did that initially kind of in 2012, but it really wasn't until 2014, as I was saying earlier, where we started to push the envelope a little bit, and get our name out there and start to get homeowners calling us directly, and again, push the envelope and kind of hit our stride with builders understanding our details and then pushing that portfolio out to people. That's when it all kind of came together, and we started to raise rates a little bit. And then it was, 2017 or 18 that I found Instagram, and it didn't take you long. That's really when it took off. That's really when it just took off, and now we get 10 calls a week, half of which don't go through, by the way, but we just get one call after another that sort of has allowed us to spread out and allow people to kind of trust in what we do, and again, follow those details and just make our portfolio much more robust, So you mentioned this early on, as you started, in 2014 and in those early years, you started, the production builder, semi-custom, started taking some more chances and some more risk. And then, of course, this attracted you to that design and excited you. When do you do any production now, or have you fully moved the company into the custom world? We have fully, we had 1 foot in custom and 1 foot in production,
which is hard.
And there's people smarter than me that can run that. It wasn't for me, and I was hurting on both ends, really. Yep. So I wasn't able to provide a great service for either. So at some point in our career, which is really more like 2018, that I kind of made more of a push. I read the book called The Pumpkin Plan, where essentially it talks about, clients, and it equated them with being like these pumpkin seeds that these farmers really cultivate and pick only 3 instead of 40, so I started to do that in day one. I doubled my prices, which sort of, shed some builders that without burning bridges too much. And it allowed me to, just concentrate on the guys that really cared about design and cared about what we did. And the guys that were just there because we were the cheap, fast guy went away. Again, hopefully without burning a bridge. So when things go down again, hopefully I can still call those guys. But we were able to, just get a little bit of freedom and therefore pay more attention to the higher end clients. And fortunately / unfortunately, I keep doing that. I've doubled prices once more since then, and we're just getting a little bit more acute on what we do. Because Brad, there for a while, we were probably drawing around 600 houses a year.
What?
Not all from scratch, though. There was some builders that would come back to us and say, hey, I want to do that house again and make some revisions. And so at the end of the year, we'd have, let's call it 600 invoices, but all of those weren't houses from scratch. So when I started jumping into these higher end details and pushing the envelope and putting all this thought and effort into the plans, there was no way to sustain that. We're a staff of 10, right? So 10 guys, essentially, each one is starting, 2 houses. At the time, they were starting like 2 houses a week. And now we're down to like 1 house every other week from scratch. I have 3 head designers that start 1 house every other week. And it's still, man, I want to keep going and kind of get a little bit. I would love to do 20 houses a year, but I've had to sort of like find my place in there the hard way, sort of like kicking and screaming and clawing up this wall. I went from production and just kind of just like easing and finding my footing, still with the fear in the back of my mind, like, oh man, it could fall any day. Forget the recession, just like everything could fall apart at any time. And that's maybe because I lived through the recession. That's in the back of my mind at all times. So I'm very careful not to burn bridges and sort of, but because of the love of what I do and me wanting to just draw better homes that work better for people, I have to slow down and we have to get more acute with our designs. And that's a path we're on and we're pushing hard for, and we get better each day.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make is, Tony, when you say, I've doubled my rates or my costs went up, it's not just, hey, I have a name now, I'm charging more. I mean, there's investment, there's time, there's education, there's research, there's employees, as you mentioned, as you're hiring people. And a big thing you mentioned early on in the conversation was processes and systems, like you really got that dialed in. That's a value to the client. That's a value to the customers. And now Tony has all this experience and he's dialed in systems, and that's why your prices can increase, because now, it's justified, right? Because everything's dialed in from that aspect.
And that's exactly, it wasn't about the name recognition at all. Really, it was like, okay, I want to create these better designed homes, and we have to put more thought into that and more energy and more collaboration within the office. Now we put things up on the screen and everybody looks at it and we come up with ideas, and really, again, thinking about the position on the land from the very first day. I'm thinking about, how does the house sit? How does the topography work? Where are the views? What views do I not want to see? How does the sun come into the house from multiple angles? You can't do that and draw 600 houses a year, right? So we were providing a better service, a more detailed plan with all the details that we were doing. And this is pre 3D. We were doing everything in 2D at this point. So it was even more streamlined, but still we were adding so much more time and energy into the plan. So it wasn't about name recognition. I think name recognition followed those processes and those changes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was speaking with the builder just the other night, and he had mentioned that, he said, look, as a company, we have some name recognition. We've built this brand. We've been working for a long time, but we don't have the systems in place. Like, we're kind of scatterbrained, and he's pretty open about it. And he's like, I would like to raise my rates, or I'd like to be more competitive again in this market, but I understand that on the back end, I can't just go to a client and say that when I don't have my ducks in a row. I have to get that done first, and then I can advance to the next level.
Exactly. There's so many things you have to do to be able to raise your rates and to provide a better service. You have to get better at customer service. You have to have your processes all in a line. You have to provide more detailed plan sets. There's the artistic piece of that where you need to provide better designs and spend more time with the clients. And it was one day in a staff meeting, I sort of drew that bubble diagram out for the staff. I was like, hey, we need all of these things because we can't just be really good at design but we don't call people back. Or we can't be, we have to have all of those things all together. We have to have the talent. We have to have the culture here in the office. We have to have the customer service. We have to have the tools, meaning the software. And all of that has to merge together. Not to raise our rates necessarily. That kind of just follows us providing a better service. And that's really what it's about. It's not about, I'm not chasing money at all. The money piece of it is just a means to support the design that I'm trying to create and the direction of the company that I'm trying to create. And that's it.
I love that you shared that. This gets me excited because I've had this conversation so many times with our clients, and architecture plays a huge role in what we do, right? And the skill level of the architect, the details, the drawings that allows me to be more cost effective. I can be more accurate in my bidding. We can build quicker. We have less issues, less plan busts, the list goes on. And what I've told clients, it's funny because as we go through this, and early on, truth be told, like I didn't have the experience or education, haven't gone through enough trial and error and issues where a client may want to hire a different architect. And for easy math, let's say they have architect A at 50,000, architect at B at 100,000. Well, architect A, is giving them 15 sheets and architect B is giving them 150 sheets, right? Like honestly, and details and this information. I tell the client, you're spending whatever it is on your house, a lot of money for 50 grand. Do you understand like how quickly in change orders or plan busts or time delays or that'll go so fast in building materials and issues if the plans aren't detailed in. Whereas if by investing a little bit more upfront and planning correctly, it's justified. You may pay Tony more, but you're going to get the back end side that's going to not only be better for you, but better for us as the builder, and especially even furthermore, warranty down the road.
Absolutely. And that's where the builders here locally, I'm glad you see that as a builder, because a lot of builders here locally, just when I tell them our new prices and processes and things, they're like, that's crazy, man. But the homeowners, especially nationally, the ones that we bring in from social media and from our website, they see that's the whole reason they call us. It's for that value, right? And we're not at the level where we're doing 150 pages. Our business model right now is set up where we're highly detailed on the exterior with framing and cornice details, where we detail, every quarter of the inch of the outside, but the inside, we're still working with interior designers and having them kind of go and do selections. We do a little bit of project management and things like that as needed, but I'm not running the job. So from our perspective, we're able to kind of get in there with our business model and be somewhere in the middle. We're not, draftsman or production, but I'm also not Jeffrey Dungan. You know what I mean? So it's like somewhere kind of in this space that's in the middle,
Yeah,
and really, I couldn't be him if I wanted to. But I'm just finding, like, what are my expertise? What am I good at? Where can I go with this and find a hole in the market that's somewhere in the middle?
I love that. Now here's the interesting thing. I mean, you have 10 employees, which is no small firm by any means, especially on the architecture side. I mean, that's a lot of people to manage. How's that been? The hiring side, the training side, finding the right people. How do you hire? How do you find good people to work for your firm?
Social media is really the main spot now, but we've used the normal, like LinkedIn and things like that to hire people. But the way I like to do it, and we've been fortunate, by the way, where a lot of my guys have been with me since the beginning. We have some new people, of course, but a lot of the guys have been with me, 10 years, 8 years, 9 years. But social media, brings a lot of them in. And the rhythm that I found lately is I like for people to come in for a whole day or 2 days and just sit over the shoulder of us, maybe pop in a meeting with me and watch me sketch with a client and just try to get a vibe of what we're going for. But the things that I'm looking for are really just a passion for architecture and somebody that wants to come in and just, work as hard as they can to achieve the goals. And they have the same vision that I do. And they're willing to, I heard this somewhere and it was really good, but someone that thrives with a steep learning curve. That's what I'm looking for. I don't want anybody, including myself, to just kind of sit idle and say, okay, we figured it out. This is what we're going to do. We're not going to change. I tell my guys all the time, and this is bad, I shouldn't say this on a podcast, but I want everybody uncomfortable. We should all be uncomfortable all the time. If we're just sitting there going, I know exactly what to do and everything's great and this is super easy, I think we're going to fold. In the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, when I came in 20 years ago, everybody was hand drafting. There was a few guys that were like, I'm not going to hire a draftsman to do CAD, or I'm not going to switch to CAD. And a lot of those guys that found their lane and didn't change are gone. And so that's always in the back of my mind, where I'm every year we get better and better, and we're changing how, anywhere from like processes to the design of things and how we do things, the technology piece. I'm changing that all the time. So I want employees that embrace that. And I have them from time to time, but everybody gets a little grumpy when all those things are going on, and it's hard. But then we look back and I'm like, man, it's so amazing, like how far we've come. And I tell the guys all the time, like, this really uncomfortable part where everything's kind of like feels like in chaos and we're learning and we're doing all these things, this is the best time. You're going to look back in 10 years and say you were a part of that. And this is the best time of the company. And I give a lot of those little speeches that come off a little cheesy, but I think that it helps sort of develop the culture and make sure that everybody sees the vision of where I want to take things. And really, when I say I want to take things, I'm sort of the leader of that, but by no means is it the Tony Frazier show, because it was when I had 3 employees, but you get to 10, man, and more. Everybody has brought little pieces to the company and added a different dynamic and really like shaped it. And we did this together. I couldn't do it without them. I like to think they couldn't do it without me as well, but at this level anyways. But man, it's really cool, like what everybody has brought and what everybody is kind of doing on a daily basis, and everybody challenging themselves And again, you stop and look back. It's like, man, look how far we've come in a year. It's amazing. And we just keep going. So long answer, but you get the idea.
I do. Well, it's amazing because, I mean, as a visionary, which you are, I mean, Tony, I mean, I'm sure even when you started, you kind of knew your wheelhouse, but at the same time, you knew where you're going, right? And as you mentioned, you can't be stagnant. It's so easy in our industry to be stagnant, or this is how it's been done, or this is how I've done it forever. I mean, in construction and architecture, probably more so construction for me, it's just you fight these battles of, this is how I've always done it, right?
It's
and
comfortable.
We're so slow. Yeah, it's comfortable. And as you mentioned, you have to be uncomfortable. That's the only way you're going to grow. And so with that uncomfort, I mean, not everyone is, proponent of being uncomfortable. Some people like to stay in their lane and, hit that comfort zone. So from a culture side, as you look at that with your, having 10 employees, and even though you've had some for a long time, how do you keep that culture refined? How do you keep that current? How do you keep them, happy and still motivated with the uncomfort you bring to them?
And let me preface this with, I don't want to sit here and say that I'm perfect at it, and there's been a lot of challenges, and it's a struggle every day. But I think the big thing for us is, one, sort of like constant reminder of the direction where we're going, but also collaboration is huge. A lot of times these guys can get behind a desk and not really, some of them don't even have social media, or they're not necessarily aware of kind of what we've done and where we're going. So bringing that to the forefront has been huge for us. Collaboration, where we, at the end of staff meetings, we like to put, a house that anybody's working on the screen that they're kind of proud of, and in different stages, by the way, and we pop it up in 3D and spin around, and everybody adds their ideas, and not all of them are taken, but it just gets everybody like engaged and involved. And as a group, we try to do as many site visits as we can, that time will allow for, in different stages, framing, finished products. That for us has been the biggest piece. Just collaboration, everybody being on the same page and coming together has been the best piece for culture. But also getting processes and systems and everything in place. Certainly when I had 3 employees, I was a bottleneck in all of that. And it wasn't until much later, somewhat directed by employees being, like, hey, this has to change. I brought in, a plan coordinator that now handles all the incoming calls and sort of fields all of that and siphons it into one spot where I'm able to just do a consultation, and then she follows that project all the way through and makes sure that, everything's on schedule, and she has all the inspiration photos already set and everything already in files, and everything's set up and everybody knows where those are. Whereas before it was me like, oh, you're starting to work on that? Okay, cool. Let me see if I can dig through emails and find that client inspiration photo. And now it's very on point and succinct. And when a project manager does start it, we then collaborate. We all meet with the client again. Everybody's in the same room. We touch base, to sort of, recap the first meeting that we had, but also come up with different ideas, and everybody's involved. And all of those processes, it just, again, I want people to be uncomfortable, but not that uncomfortable where things aren't working properly. So that is huge for the culture, to get everything working properly, to get BIM up and running, which we can talk about in a bit. All of that, and to get people excited and engaged and see what we're doing, all of that has developed the culture to where it is today, which isn't perfect, and it's still going, and like I said, it needs a lot of work, but it's doing so much better, and it feels good.
Yeah, I love that. What's interesting is I love the concept of the plant coordinator. I look at that, similar for me, my project coordinators, and these ladies do a phenomenal job for us. But on your side, how do you train a plant coordinator? Because this is a key component to any company. I mean, chasing leads, vetting clients, vetting potential leads. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. How does your plant coordinator understand when that call comes in, is this a right project for, Frazier Home Design? Does it meet, our quota? Does it meet, our timeline or schedule? How has that training been done?
It's funny. I actually learned something from one of your podcasts with Christian Daw, I think it was, which I thought was just a guy that posted other people's work. But then I heard the podcast of like, he had some great ideas and his systems were on point, and he was like a year in. So I borrowed from that a little bit. And now we have a form that she sends out, and her and I have gone over, 1,000 different scenarios of different questions, but there are ways to vet out clients. And, a quick example is, we of course ask them their budget. We ask them their anticipated timeline of the design. We ask them if they've been working, sort of like some key questions. Have you worked with an architect before? Did you draw your own plan? Are you working with a builder? And all of those things, those are very key questions that not everybody recognizes at the beginning, but those are red flag questions for me. So I'm able to see, is it in a budget that I want to be in? Is their timeline reasonable? What do their inspiration photos look like? Are they Mediterranean and not really what we do at all? And so because of this list and our project coordinator being in the meetings with me for almost a year now, she really gets a feel of what I'm looking for and what the ideal client is. And so it's not like I set her down day one and kind of said, okay, here's what needs to happen. It was really sort of a system that developed over time because she was our first project coordinator that we hired. So I didn't really know what it was going to be day one. I just know that I needed some help, and I didn't need to be the guy answering every phone call and fielding every client. So
I love that, because that's probably one of the most key things. I mean, you've shared a lot of great content already, but I mean, in my opinion, understanding the red flags, right? Because by understanding the red flags and the pain points you've had in your business, if you use those now and you create an outline, if you will, as you've done, to say, okay, these are things we're looking for, just simple questions for the potential lead. And if they're, answering some of these in a red flag manner, then you're like, okay, something's up. My trigger's up. I'm going to be really careful here.
Yeah.
And the same for me. Like if I have a client that's like, and not to go against any client if they have great taste, when I have a client that says, hey, Brad, I know what I want. I have my floor plan. I found online.
Yes.
I don't need a designer. It's like these kind of things. I'm like, I need to run as fast as I can.
Red flag.
And not in a bad way. Because I know the value and how much I need Tony, right? I know how much I need my designers and the coordination there. And I know what you bring to the table and what you do for me to perform. And so by understanding that, these are simple questions that help me vet a client, right? And by knowing that and documenting that, which is what you've done, I'm sure that's helped your success.
Absolutely. And, so our toughest client, and maybe I shouldn't say this on a recording, but our toughest client is sort of like a type A personality, someone that well, let me say this. Our best client is somebody that is able to sort of like give us this vision that they have, and they have trust in us, and they allow us to take those designs and add some creative freedom. We're getting everything they want in the house, but they're not like leading the way for us. Those are the projects that I sort of zoom back out and go, those were great projects, not only during the process, but it was a better product in the end. It fit the client better. It fit the site better. It was more cohesive on the design. The toughest clients are the ones that are more type A, and they come in with a pre-drawn plan, or they want to manage everything, but they've never drawn a house before. They don't know anything about house plans. And again, the toughest one is one that has that personality, but also they can't visualize anything. That is my absolute toughest client that we have learned to field out. And by the way, some of those, there's a small percentage of those that have turned out, and I'm like, man, that is better because they did that. And really, we came up with a better product because of that, but it's a rarity. And so one of the big ones for me is when they say, I've drawn my own plan. That is sort of like me going into the dentist and saying, I looked this up on Google last night, or I did like 3 days of Google searches, and here's where I want you to drill. Or my financial advisor, who I go into, by the way, and everything's Greek to me. But if I went in and say, hey, man, I Googled this stuff, and I want you to put these things here and move this here, I mean, that's crazy to me. I mean, that's the whole reason I hire people, is to trust them and to let them do their thing. And so those are the red flags that I look for and have been burned with over the years, where projects have taken longer than they needed to be. It's always those people that don't want to pay they don't pay on time, or they don't want to pay at all, or it's always that. So we've sort of like found our groove over time and sort of pointed our boat in that direction, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being a bank, right?
Yeah.
The whole time. I mean, you have to feed the meter and keep that going. That's part of the process. But
absolutely,
as we pivot here, I think this is interesting on the design side, because as I mentioned, we're gonna have all your social media stuff tagged here and for people to follow you. But I see, in Arizona, we're very locked as far as style goes.
Right.
We're some of the HOAs are very restrictive. There's a lot of Mediterranean and Tuscan, which is kind of a tired design that's been around for a long time here, and some of the HOAs are moving and pivoting and allowing customers to go more modern and do other things. But, for you have like Georgian and English arts and craft style. I mean, how did you get into those styles? What's the difference? How do you educate your clientele on that?
So, that's the beauty of Raleigh. There's always been a wide variety of styles. Though, as I mentioned, it's still a little bit more like semi-custom type of production. So that other than like ultra modern, which is sort of like came into light recently and started to be accepted, really you couldn't get through.
They do have ultra modern there in Raleigh.
We are starting to. Initially it was in more like infill areas where you could do whatever style you wanted. There was no HOA. But in neighborhoods, the very first style we were able to get in was what I call like a prairie style, where you have like a 312 roof pitch with a 3 or 4 foot overhang, and you have modern windows and things, but it still had more like traditional type bones. They're just now starting to accept flat roofs and things, but it was always sort of like craftsman, Georgian. Historically we have some great architecture that was here in the early 1920s, but modern farmhouse and all of that was always accepted. There wasn't a ton of like English arts and crafts, I would say. And again, I go back, the first one that I saw was Dixon Kirby. It was sort of like the shining light coming down, and everything like came together for me. And I was like, man, those guys are awesome. And I'm like, where are they getting that from? And then I went to their page and did a little stalker stuff, and I was like, who are they following? Because I know that they're getting that from somewhere. And I saw that they were following a company called Pursley Dixon. And then I went to their page, and it was just completely blown away. Just like, detail galore, proportion, style, settings on the lot. Everything was just absolutely beautiful. And then from there, I found Jeffrey Dungan, or Dungan Niquette at the time, and then kind of dove into that a lot. And then I found Ruward Veltman, who was back in Charlotte, and then I found Bill Ingram. And then at the very end, I found Bobby McAlpin and realized that he was sort of like connected to all of them. And then I realized all of those guys went to Auburn University. All of those guys were roughly the same age. And Bobby McAlpin seemed to be like the professor, like the guy that all of them would work for at one time. So I took this really deep dive into I listened to every interview, bought every book, listened to every recording that I could from every single one of those guys. And then I found out that a lot of that was derived from England in the late 1800s. So I was diving into CFA Boise and Lutjens and really just kind of like immersing myself in all of that. And just trying it, like throwing it out to our builders here. And again, it's tough on the detail side, and that came with time, but that has helped me so much. I was just inspired so much by these guys, and I continue to be. And so really, I don't know if this answers your question with the style, but like that sort of was like the derivative of where we are today is just getting sort of a creative vibe and feel from those guys. And if I could do it all over again, I would rewind and go to Auburn University and work for Bobby McAlpin. But it's so cool to see what those guys are doing, and the fact that social media is there has really brought that to the forefront. And that's not really, when I first got on, Brad, it was like my young niece that told me about it and said some businesses were on there, and I jumped on, and probably the third or fourth person I Googled was Jeffrey Dungan, and saw his name on there and was like, man, he's doing some cool stuff. But what's so great about Instagram is it's not this polished view like his website. He's in his office with his phone, like taking a picture of a sketch or out on a site. I was like, man, I've got to do that. And then again, I just started to like post photos and do the exact same thing, and kept doing it. And then one day I look up and I've got some followers and I'm getting calls, and it wasn't in my business model at all, right? It's sort of suddenly it all started to like flood in. And next thing you know, I'm drawing houses in Utah, or we are drawing houses in Utah and Oklahoma and upstate New York and, Tennessee and Georgia. I mean, all over, just from this social media platform. Whereas I used to advertise in magazines and spend, $1,500 a month to get like half a page, and get the only calls I got were like, what's the color of that home? So like to go to this free app, this suddenly like just calls are flooding in, and it had brought us national. It's insane. So now I'm just like looking, what's next? I don't want that faucet to turn off one day either. But it's been amazing, sort of inspiration kind of flowing into that trajectory. And again, it wasn't a business model. It's not like I predicted it when I jumped on. I had no clue. I just stumbled into it.
It's kind of amazing how that works. I think this goes back to earlier in the conversation when you're mentioning that, we were talking about rates. Well, part of this too, as you mentioned, all this research you just named, all these architects that you had admiration for and you followed, and you're trying to understand the details in the design and where does this history come from, as you mentioned, England, late 1800s. And, this is education that you're now bringing to the client that you've done for them and in their behalf to bring these styles to life. And, social media, again, that's how you and I connected. We became friends on there and have networked. And so are there other social media platforms you're using? Are you running social media, Instagram yourself? How have you, especially now with your growth and the reputation you have on there and the fan base you have, which has been pretty awesome to watch. How's that going now?
So we've used Houzz prior to Instagram. So we're on Houzz, we're on Pinterest, LinkedIn, of course. But I still, I get questions from time to time, leads from time to time. But ironically, most of the clients that bring in inspiration photos, certainly of 50 and above, they aren't bringing in Instagram posts. They're bringing in Houzz links. But for whatever reason, we don't get a ton of activity on there. But I do. I'm much more active with Instagram. Just it's very easy to post. I find those other apps, and maybe it's user error, but they're not as easy to get content out there and to get feedback directly back. So Instagram, I'm able to post something and, within an hour, I have a few hundred likes and comments and direct feedback. And then the following few days we start getting calls. I don't see that with any other social media app, and I'm looking for the next app. So if you know it, Brad, let me know.
Well, it's interesting because as you mentioned, though, I think there's a personality you've built in. And you mentioned this early on that following Jeff that, for you can go on Instagram, and I've seen the same thing for me. I mean, you can have your feed that's very professional. You can have your feed that, really caters to what your work and your focus is and your goal structure there. Whereas stories you can use to show, here's how I draw, here's behind the scenes, here's the company culture, here's my family. I mean, there's different things where you can build this where people now become connected to you.
Absolutely. And we use stories for just that. If I'm like walking through a site or something, I'm not necessarily posting that into a post, right? So I can just on a whim, I'm out on a site, or Brad, I don't know if you've seen it before. I drive by like houses every weekend. I find myself kind of driving by projects, and I'll just drive down the street and like just hang my phone out the window in a story and kind of like loop that together with some music or something. Those are big popular posts with us, and stories and actually reels as well are great for those type of things. Sort of like spur of the moment, I'm on a site, check it out. And then we get, photographers involved and post our work on regular posts, which is just, again, it's just so amazing the feedback that we get from people. Immediate, it's awesome.
So with your eye for design, how critical are you of other styles and designs you see? And I don't mean it in a trolling way where you're going on and commenting, but just internally as you're seeing things like, hey, I would have done that different, or what if they did this? I mean, how does that impact maybe your creativity moving forward?
Well, I'm able to see mistakes that I've also made, and I'm sure that the names of those guys that I've mentioned, not all of them follow me either, so they're probably seeing stuff on my stuff, so I'm very aware of that. But I'm able to see things, and again, lessons that I've learned with grid patterns, proportions, scale, roof massing, all of that I can see very, very quickly and see those same mistakes. But it's really cool, especially like here in Raleigh. Again, I mentioned Dixon Kirby was kind of like the first one, and I sort of came in with 100 builders under my belt. So when I started to make those changes, it was very rapid around Raleigh that happened, and we were able to take notice. And even though a lot of designers that are kind of behind me are doing kind of like following that same feel, and I'm seeing errors, and they're getting better, you know what I mean? And I don't pretend to be like the king of all of that, but it's so cool to see like guys following that path, and me kind of look back and go, man, I can see that they're kind of like pulling pieces and pulling inspiration from me, and what an awesome feeling. So I can't critique that work but so much, right? It's just amazing to see it. I'm like so excited, just to see, like, I'm just a young guy that like worked his ass off to like go up that ladder kicking and screaming, and then like look back and go, damn, man, people are like looking at my stuff. I can tell. It's awesome. I'm all about it.
See, it's great maturity, great perspective. I think what's really tough from your perspective, it's different for me. We go out and build, but from a designer or an architect, where you're the creator, you're creating these designs, and you have people maybe mimic or copy, if you will, or use elements that inspire them. There's a maturity there, because I'm sure on some level too, maybe you're like, hey, I created that, and now you're using it, and it took a lot of time and research and education, but how is that? Is it more flattery, or is it sometimes
great
aggravating?
question? And the answer is it depends, right? So if I see an exact copy, even when the proportions are messed up, I make a call. Yeah. But when I see like, man, that's that 2-story bay I do 1 million times, or that's that cove mold detail that I do, and I know that locally that's where they got it, or they saw it on a set of plans, or man, they weren't doing that 3 months ago, and now I can see they're kind of borrowing those pieces. So as long as it's done with respect. Because look, I'm sure there's a time when Dixie Kirby felt the same way about me, and maybe some of those other guys have seen my stuff and felt the same way. But as long as it's done from like an inspiration piece, you're not grabbing like an exact replica of a piece. But if you're using it within reason and you have your own creative license with that inspiration, completely acceptable. Even when I'm seeing some of those themes duplicated, I love it. But a duplication, we've gone down that road a couple times with some people, and that's not appreciated by anybody, I don't think.
Yeah, no one wants an exact copy out
exactly. There. Even when and I'll see it like it'll pop. What's cool about social media, Brad, is just that is like I'll get an email from someone in Oklahoma that goes, "Hey man, isn't this your stuff? Or it looks a lot like yours." And I'll look it up, and it's like an exact copy, but the proportions are all like jacked up, and sometimes I make a call for that one. But it's just more like, hey man, I see what you're doing. That's awesome, but don't try to keep some distance there. Yeah. So,
try to make it a little different.
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand. So, as far as the design side, when you especially training and company culture, I mean, you mentioned this that, the structural engineering firm you worked for in the very beginning, everything was, hand drawn and of course 2D through CAD and now 3D and BIM modeling. How has your company evolved using new technology and information to, again, refine that process?
The cool thing, the very first thing, sort of the big technological jump that we did here was, and you may see this from outside looking in, Brad, on social media, but it early on, I would sit in a meeting with a client and have a bunch of pieces of trash paper, and I would draw out a quick. So when I design a home for somebody, I draw it live for them, not the finished product, but just all the concepts and room locations. And initially, I would sit down with some trash paper and draw out, the kitchen and a dining room and a family room, and they wanted it rearranged, so I'd put in another layer and then sketch again, and then another layer and another layer. And then at some point, a builder came in. He had an iPad Pro, and he was like taking some notes with his pen. And I'm like, "Can I draw with that?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't see why not." So immediately, the end of the day, I went up to the Apple Store, got an iPad Pro, and tried to like find some apps that I could draw with. I saw this like T. Scott Carlisle, I think is his name. Awesome artist, architect on Instagram, and he tagged something that said Procreate one day. So I loved his drawings. I got Procreate, and from there, I started sketching and started to get good at it. And then now I sit in a meeting with a client, and there's no trash paper. I'm drawing on my iPad, and there's a big screen in the conference room. There's a couple that their drawings are coming up live on the big screen. And I'm able to overlay things and move things around and shift and rotate and erase and create different layers. And then one day, an intern was like, you could like share this, right? You could mirror a screen and share this with somebody. It's like, what? That's amazing, because we were doing a little bit out of the country, and I'd have one of my project managers like holding up an iPhone over my sketch as I was drawing, and we were going to invent this cool arm that like held the phone, But turns out an iPad is much better to do that. So that's when I found Zoom, and it was cool. I could sit with a client in Tennessee and sketch live in front of them on the iPad. And so the experience of me sketching for somebody in another state or in another city in North Carolina is the exact same thing of us sitting across the table from each other. I'm sketching live in front of them, and they are seeing that on the iPad. So it has nothing to do with 3D, but that was like the very first sort of like jump where like we're in a different world here. And by the way, luckily when COVID hit, we already had those systems in place. So it was a very smooth transition when we went back home. And as far as 3D goes, our typical platform was we were using CAD, and at the very end we'd put it into SketchUp, but the design was already kind of like towards the end, and we'd show people exterior SketchUp models. And then I hired a guy that knew Revit, and we started kind of going down the Revit path. And it was a little, I hired a guy to create the template as well. And it just, with all these roof lines that we do and all these curves and all these details, it wasn't working well for us, at least. And it might have been your podcast, Brad. I think it was Brandon Architects, where he said something, this is like a year and a half ago, and he said, we were on Revit and we switched to ArchiCAD. And I was like, what? They went away from a BIM platform to another one? And I knew ArchiCAD before, but it's sort of like the outside looking in, it's like the European version of Revit that is really big in Europe, but not big here at all.
Yep.
And I started looking into it. I called Graphisoft, And I just was blown away by what they were able to do and how they were able to draw shapes and how they were able to present that to clients. So I kind of just jumped all in. It was very uncomfortable for the office again, Brad, but I got a bunch of training. I got the deluxe package where they came in and they trained us and bought all the software day one. And this is about a year ago, I would say. And today, while it's not perfect, man, we're drawing all of our new projects in ArchiCAD in 3D, and it's brought just new life to everything. Because when I sit down with somebody and I sketch these red, kind of like down and dirty sketches, and then it goes to my project managers to put that into CAD, the very next thing they see not only is their first preliminary plan, but we also walk them through in 3D day one in the preliminary concept. So they are seeing, especially if they're in our office here, we have two screens, Brad, where I'll have my 2D drawing up and I'm sketching over it, making changes, and then our project managers in the conference room in ArchiCAD on 3D, and we're walking through the house day one. And granted, the inside isn't beautiful yet. It doesn't have like all the trim or anything, but they're able to look from the family room and see the kitchen or see outside. And we've modeled all the topography because we have the topo, so they're really able to understand how the house is sitting on the lot. That, for us, has changed everything. And so each round, it gets a little bit more detailed. They're able to see a little bit more. And so ultimately, after I sketch the outside of the home, they're able to see the outside in 3D. And what's awesome about ArchiCAD is you can export to a program called BIMX, which is like a free, I feel like I'm plugging ArchiCAD here, but I'm not. But it's a free download. It's a free download that builders and homeowners can download, and they can walk through in 3D on their own. Now granted, it takes some video game experience to do that, but you can walk through on your own. And the biggest, coolest piece, and you may have seen this on our social media platform, is what it can do for the builders. We're able to take these 3D drawings that have all of our details and all of our cross sections, and so it has all the 2D data. But remember, the 2D data is the 3D. It's one and the same. You're able to go on there as a builder and fly through the house, cut sections, click on a detail and see exactly where that detail is cut and how that detail comes together. And a builder can pan around. And, in the commercial world, Brad, at least in some areas of the country, they're already doing, not necessarily ArchiCAD, but they're already in some sort of digital platform versus a big roll of pages out on site. And they're able to pan through and again, get very specific with those details. And for us to be able to do that, there's not another company here in Raleigh that's doing that. So when I go back to my bubble diagram, Brad, it's like when we're able to take that and then mix it with an artistic piece and get the customer service in there and get all of these things that merge together, man, it's so exciting to be a part of the company, says the boss. But it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. No, but I'll chime in there because I totally agree. I mean, what I've seen is, I'm heavily involved in the pre-construction process, with all of our projects. And what I've seen on these architects, as you mentioned, is you can go 3D like an ArchiCAD and you can show solstice. I mean, for Arizona, Arizona's hot in the summer. And to understand where shade is, where that sun's coming in at certain times of the day, especially as it's setting in the west in July and August. I mean, trust me, when it's 115, 118, it makes a huge difference. And then, as you mentioned, showing topography and the views and really understand that for window placement. I mean, it just makes my life so much easier where the client's not coming in, as the house is framed saying, well, I want a bigger window or I want to change this or this view. I mean, really, you've done all that R&D already a year in advance.
It's awesome. It's so cool to show a client. So we get a lot of clients that are very concerned about light, or every client, the very first thing they say is, I love light. Every single client, every single time. So for them to stand in their family room and us to jump into, they have plugins just like Revit where we can jump into Twinmotion or Inkscape or whatever and show them the projection of the sun at certain times of the year and times of the day. And they can stand there and see the light come in. Because again, every client is like, I want light. They just want as much light as possible. And I'm like, well, all light isn't good. I don't necessarily want a big, you've seen my window towers, Brad. I try not to do that on the western side of the house, right? And even southern exposure, which is brutal at certain times of the year, we need to create big overhangs to kind of block that, because in the summer, the sun is up above. And if we create big overhangs, we can block that. And a lot of people have this sort of, they're coming from older, dark homes, and it's almost like they think they want sun beating on the side of their face in the middle of the day. So I have to go through that with them and kind of explain how that would work, but also how does it reflect off of other things? How does that look? How does that room, how is that room experienced in a different way at different times of the day? And for us to be able to show that in a digital platform is amazing. We haven't gotten there yet. I know a lot of your architects that you interviewed have, but they're the next step. As soon as we grasp everything, we get everything running, is going into full virtual reality, because even this 3D that we're doing, it's still lost a little bit, where someone will show them a house with a big vaulted ceiling, or even a 10-foot ceiling or 12, and they'll be like, the room's small. It just doesn't quite feel right. And we're like, no, the room is humongous. And really it's virtual reality that sort of will put that in perspective for people. So BIMX, which I mentioned, has like a very rough sort of rudimentary slide your phone in a cardboard deal. And I get sick when I do it, but we're on the edge of sort of like forming that. I would say by the end of the year, we're going to have clients in here in virtual reality walking through their house. Again, not just at the end, but every single stage throughout the process. And that for me is what's so cool. It's no longer going from 2D and then we have a separate 3D component that they don't line up, but the 2D is the 3D. Everything matches. And from a quality assurance thing, it's amazing. Like, I'll never have another plan where I have a window on the floor plan or a twin window in the floor plan, and there shows a triple on the exterior, and we don't catch that until like the very end before we order windows. It's like, we'll never have that again. And I know that most of your listeners, as far as designers go, are probably already using BIM, but here in Raleigh, it was sort of past that. It wasn't done. It was more 2D, and so for us to get into that and see that change happen has been so exciting for us and for our clients.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, it's funny you say that, because even Phoenix is a massive metro area. I mean, we're top 5 cities now, I think, because of, as far as you look at county-wise. But, it's a big place, and there's still architects hand drawing. There's still architects that don't use any BIM.
Wow.
Architects that don't use any like ArchiCAD or Revit or anything. I mean, it's just very 2D, and there's a lot of mistakes, right? Because as you mentioned, it's, you get snowblind. You're looking at the same thing over and over, and you don't realize I've made changes on these pages, and client may make a change. I don't go back and edit on every page. And so, it puts a lot of strain on us. And so for you to be able to use BIM to catch that and, to find these solutions in advance and check the mechanicals and plumbing and make sure where ductwork's going. So, matches structure. I mean, this saves me so much time.
It's amazing. And what's one of the biggest things, Brad, is like, again, I mentioned the 2D is the 3D, but like, I can move something on the floor plan. It changes it on the elevation, on the 2D elevation, changes it on the 3D model, changes it on the cross section, changes it on the call outs and everything changes in one swoop. I can't imagine these guys that are drawing 150 page plans and they're using 2D, CAD, or God forbid, hand drawing the whole thing. I can't imagine what those changes are like. I can't imagine.
It's crazy. Well, I mean, your passion just shows, and it shows in your designs. And Tony, I mean, I've been a huge fan for a long time. As I mentioned, it's just I love your work. I think you're doing amazing things. We're better for following you. Outside of the architecture, which you're so passionate about, what do you do for fun?
I was thinking about that. It's like most of my life is filled with architecture. As sad as that sounds, on the weekends, I get my whole family involved. I have 2 daughters, wife, and we drive around and look at houses. They aren't as excited as I am, but. We have a little beach place. We go down and have a boat and we fish and do cool things like that. But really, I would just say spending time with my family. But my one true hobby, passion, love is architecture. It's on my mind at all times. So it's like the best, it's so cool to be able to create a home for somebody. You've heard this before. But you create a home for somebody. They live in, they raise their family, they create all these memories. And you've heard that answer before, but I'll also tell you, it's also about me. Because at heart, I'm an artist. And how cool is it that I can sit in my sunroom at 5 a.m. and sketch out just some basic ideas on paper, fast forward 18 months, and that's on display for everybody to see. And my art is there for everybody. And it's people are driving by it every day. And here's the coolest thing, Brad, is in 80 years, it's still there. And people are hopefully talking about it.
Right.
What other job can you? I don't know a better job. I don't. And so like, it's so cool to help people enrich their lives, make their lives better, but also, to enrich my own and my family's. So it's been amazing. And I'm just so excited to do what we do.
Well, I love it. I love that you're sharing your legacy, and, it's amazing. So what do you have upcoming and exciting, Tony?
Again, sort of drawing things in different states. We have some cool stuff going in Tennessee right now and Atlanta. I would say the biggest change, and you've kind of seen this, I'm sure, outside looking in, is for a while there, we were kind of, getting a little like flamboyant with things and doing a lot of steep pitches. And that's kind of what like brought a lot of people to us. But we're getting better, and I'm getting more reserved and don't feel like I need to kind of like throw it all out there as our proportions are getting better, and each design is just getting more dialed in and proportion again better. And it's just our work is sort of evolving, and you're seeing a big change in it. And that as a whole is just so exciting for us. Just like, again, going back to like, I don't want to be what I was last year. It's like each year to see us get better is the true passion, man. It is just to see us sort of evolve and continue to change. It's not like one project, it's the whole collection in the body of where we're going as this team together. It's great.
Well, I love it. Well, where can our listeners find you?
Frazier Home or www.frazierhomedesign.com, and that's FRAZIER. Or you can reach me on Instagram at Frazier Home Design.
Well, for all of you listening, make sure you go into the show notes, click on that, check them out. They do some amazing work. You'll definitely be inspired. So, Tony,
Absolutely,
thanks for
Brad.
making time
Appreciate
today.
you having me, man. It was great to talk.